Go. Okay, hi. Welcome to the Blue Thread, or should I say welcome back to the Blue Thread after our summer break. So the last webinar we had was in July. So we sort of took August off. And now in September, we're starting the sort of autumn winter program with some really interesting webinars coming up. So I'm Mark Smith. I'm the RSK Group Water Sector Director, and delighted to be discussing really one of the main challenges of the water sector today. And of course, within this webinar series, we sort of start in the UK, we go global and come back. Today, we're very firmly based in the UK, and we're talking an awful lot about reputation. The topic is very timely because for anybody who sort of follows the UK water sector, water is currently, discussion about water, or arguments about water, are currently raging in all places, boardrooms, water company boardrooms, regulatory fora, Westminster, the Labour Party conference is on it today. And of course, probably most importantly for today's webinar, social media. We are going to talk today about three things. And we've got some great guests to talk with them, so I'm looking forward to it. Securing the UK's water future, engaging the public, and shaping infrastructure. So that's the title of the webinar. And there are three big topics, and we're going to try and pull it together today. But first, let's have a quick chat about some housekeeping. So, as usual, the same rules. Everyone's microphone is muted, but that doesn't mean that you can just be passive. If you have questions, please just bang them into the questions into the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Any questions that we don't get to answer, we will answer them afterwards. But I generally try to get through as many of them as we possibly can. And I think the social media, please tell your friends, your colleagues, people who are in the sector, people who are out of the sector about the Blue Thread, because we try to keep it at light, even though it's some heavy topics. We don't go technically very deep here. We just want to engage people in the world of water. Social media is very important to us. So please hashtag the Blue Thread, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever. Okay. Finally, is about an hour after the webinar today, we will be issuing a survey that helps us to sort of guide the next topics, improve your experience of the Blue Thread. So please, if you have a few minutes, it only takes a couple of minutes, please help us and fill that in as well. So, without any further ado, we'll move on really to today. So, really, as we sit here in September 2024, the UK water industry is at a crossroads. It's 35 years after privatisation, and I must say the industry does seem to be in a bit of a slump. There's endless negative headlines about sewage on our beaches and our rivers, potential water shortages, floods, droughts, and this combined then with lurid stories really about excess profits, asset stripping, high executive salaries, has very much presented the industry in a negative light and put us on the back foot, really. However, whatever activists and politicians might say, there really are no easy solutions available if we as a country want to deliver a world-class 21st century water sector in the UK. Now, what does that mean is even up for debate. But I think what it does mean is clean rivers, clean beaches, water for all at an affordable cost. And it will take political will to do that. It will also take billions of pounds of investment over many decades. And I think anyone who says there's any easy answers is wrong. You know, nationalisation, fine, that's a structural thing. But it would still need billions of pounds over many decades, sustained investment over many decades to get to where we want to get to. We also need to engage an ever-changing professional workforce. What I mean by that is many different skills. It's not just engineers. It's multi-agency, multidisciplinary, blue collar, white collar, financial, environmental, everybody. We need an engaged public to make it happen. And I think that's where I want to go to today, because we are not in the webinar today, because as an industry or as a sector, we're not anywhere near that today. Today, if there's a sort of a phrase that sums up the UK water sector is the lack of trust. There's a lack of trust between many different parties. There's a lack of trust between the public and the water companies. There's a lack of trust between the water companies and their political masters. There's a lack of trust, I think, also between the regulators, both environmental and financial, and the bill payers, as well as the water companies. And there's a danger, actually, of the stratification that almost the water industry is almost separate to society, when actually the water industry is probably the most fundamental part of society. Without water, we don't function. We can't function. We all know that. So we need to rebuild trust, so everybody can see why and how, and that's really important. Why, not just how, but why the sector needs to and can deliver the water services and environmental standards we need. They're not mutually exclusive. We can deliver the water services required whilst improving the environmental standards, but we can't do it without long-term investment. And I would argue that in order to rebuild the trust, and I think we have to accept the fact that we need to rebuild the trust, first step in that is we need to educate society, politicians, the media, so that a greater understanding will drive support for our sector, because it is a complex sector. I think I said last week that, you know, it's not rocket science, it's more complex than that. And it is. You know, we essentially are custodians of the water cycle, and that's a public health service, of course it is, but it's also an environmental service. And yes, we get it wrong, but we also do an awful lot of stuff right. But whatever way you want to talk about it, it is a complex offering that the water sector does, and it gets an awful lot right. But one of the most effective tools for getting the message across is through communication. And I would also argue that although the industry, as I said, has done many things well and has many successes, I think communication is not one of those successes. Most of us know the water sector through negative interactions, bills, leaks, roadworks. Those would be the three main things that if you ask your neighbours, that's what they see. They don't think of the fact that every time they flush the toilet, it works. They don't think of the fact that every time you open the tap, you get, you know, clean drinking water. And I think that's all part of the communication. So today, to discuss these matters, I'm joined by three experts, really in different ways of communicating and in different aspects of communicating with the public. So maybe if we could get everybody join me in this session here. Put on the cameras. So first up actually is Simon Wood. So Simon is the MD of BMG Research, and he also leads their insight and research arm. Over 20 years experience in primary customer research, as well as supporting companies in measuring their brand and reputation across those public relationships. Really interesting. Simon also does a lot of the work for the customer interaction for water companies and for the regulators. So I think there's some really interesting stuff there. Next up, delighted to welcome, and thank you very much for taking time, Sam, is Sam Underwood, who is the, and I get this right, Strategic Water Resources Engagement Lead at Southern Water. And I think it's fair to say that's a company not without its difficulties in reputation management in recent years. Sam's a former journalist with a philosophy degree and is tasked really with developing and delivering the company's major projects to bring new water resources into play at a time of increased risk of water shortages. So even though it's raining all the time at the moment, there is a definite underlying deterioration of access to water resources, particularly in Sam's part of the world down the southeast. So I guess we'll be talking there about water recycling and new sources. So that'd be really interesting, Sam. Good to have you here. And finally, an old friend of the webinar, Martin McCrink. So as you know, Martin is a managing partner at Copper Communications, particular expertise again in developing and implanting, I think, innovative and other communication sort of types of approaches into different sectors. And I think Copper have been really, really interesting to track in the last 12 to 18 months as to how much new engagement instruments they are using within the water sector. So that's something, again, we be able to, and I think he's going to talk about some other things that he's currently working on within the sector as well. So really good to have you all here, guys. And I want to run this as a bit of a round table, a bit of a session. So let's try an easy one, really. Is, maybe I'll start with you, Sam. What keeps you awake at night, really, in terms of Southern Water, and I take it you're strategic, so that's good, that's longer term. Well, what keeps you awake at night in terms of water resources within Southern Water? And then we can just sort of take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. Oh, crikey. Well, other than, family life and the weight of the world on my shoulders, in terms of water resources and the water industry, what keeps me awake at night is fundamentally the fact that customers don't recognise the challenge of water scarcity, that the big projects that I'm leading the engagement on are setting out to remedy. So we did some polling for our PR24 business plan recently, 25,000 customers, and only 4% of those surveyed said that water scarcity was an issue about which they should be concerned. So here we are trying to sell, these big, or the need for these big infrastructure projects, these new sources of water, as you said, Mark, water recycling front and centre within that, and fundamentally customers not recognising the need for that. So that's a real challenge for us.
Why is that, Sam? Is that because basically we haven't had standpipes in the street for 40 years? We've managed our way through drought, admittedly by the skin of our teeth a few years ago. People don't believe the press stories. Well, what is it? Just.
It's as always, Mark, it's a number of things. I mean, 4 years before I was born, the drought of 76, that's the last big drought in this country that people would probably recognise. 2022 was particularly dry. We hit drought triggers, but it was not close to 1976. The droughts that we're catering for now are 1 in 200-year droughts, and actually further ahead, 1 in 500-year droughts. So these are droughts that are, more than 5 times severe than the drought of 76, and that's important that we cater for those and that we bring in the right, water resources options to make sure we keep taps and rivers flowing in at that time. You rightly said around customers take water for granted. I mean, and I still do, having worked for the company for 15 years. You shower, you flush the loo, you brush your teeth, it's there. It's only when it's not there that you think, well, there's an issue, and you engage. And fundamentally, customers, needing to understand that water scarcity is a challenge we need to meet. When we live in a country where it rains a fair bit, we're surrounded by water, we're an island nation. There's an assumption that there's a surfeit of water, but the biggest so the UK, or England rather, needs to find 5 billion litres of extra water by 2050 just to maintain supplies. So 5 billion extra litres of water, that's according to the Environment Agency's forecasts. That's extra water, not from rivers, not from aquifers. So we've got to look to new sources. And fundamentally then connecting customers to their water supplies, to where their water comes from, and to understand that in order to leave more water in the environment, we need to create these new sources, because the biggest proportion of that 5 billion litres, so more than half of that, is around environmental destination. So it's not about climate change, it's not about population growth. Actually, Southern Water is putting in to supply a third less water than we were at privatisation because of improvements to leakage and water efficiency during that time. So we're actually taking and putting in to supply less water than we were at privatisation. But because we need to take significantly less from chalk streams, particularly, and the aquifers that serve them, we have to find these new sources of water.
That's really, really interesting. I think the 4% of people think that water scarcity is a problem would suddenly become 100% the minute it becomes a problem. And I think, to me, that just shows perhaps a lack of engagement with the industry and with the water industry and the way things are. So maybe, Simon, you're the one with the expertise in talking, in sort of talking to customers. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about how the regulator and how the water companies engage with the public? What are the ways about it? And maybe some broad sort of thinking around, some statistics that perhaps back up what Sam just said about the 4%.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if the water companies themselves, if you think about what they do, they're acting in very much the same way as any other commercial organisation that you would come across, whether it's a retailer, another utility, a bank, finance, any of those things. There's a whole raft of customer insights, customer research programs, everything from tracking when you deal with your water company, how did that experience go? There's brand reputation research to understand what you think of the water company. There's advertising research to check what messages will work, how will they land, are the comms and that kind of things working? And there's whole pieces around what customers are willing to pay for, what do customers understand about the challenge, what do they think of their bills, if a water company wants to invest in a new reservoir, what will the public think that should mean for their bills? All those kind of things. There's a huge range of things coming out of there. But I think to your second point, what we see a lot is the general public just aren't engaged in water. And Martin and I have got a piece of research and insight we've been doing around people's thoughts on the water sector. I think the staggering thing when you look across that piece is how people just don't have a clue, quite frankly. They don't know how much water they use. They don't know how much it costs. They don't know. There's a fairly basic fact about the sector.
We did actually just to cut across this. We did an internal thing in RSK actually recently. Was we just asked people how much water did you use, you know, per litres per day, and we got, it's like a straight line horizontal to the x-axis, and it runs from about 20 litres to about 1,000 litres a day. And nobody, and to me, it just shows a complete lack of, like, you know, how much, you know, and I just thought that was really strange, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's funny, we obviously work with public all the time, and normally you ask a few people, you get that kind of straight line. The more you ask, the more it starts to change, and eventually it resembles reality. We look at the data we have on water usage, and that straight line is still there. 1,500 people later, still no one's got a clue. And there's a real challenge there of how you engage with the sector, with people that aren't listening necessarily at the moment and don't really understand what it is they're facing.
So Martin, I mean, in terms of the lack of engagement, I mean, one of the things Copper does is engage with the public, you know, for many different schemes. And I know you've worked across different sort of sectors as well in terms of highways and nuclear and what have you. I mean, is it just a lack of communication, or is it a lack of education, or what is it? You know, what is the next step? What has to change in order to sort of, I hate to say educate the public because that sounds awful, you know, but you know what I mean, to bring them with us, right? Where's it? Where do you think we're missing?
Well, thanks for having me back, Mark, and and everybody as well. I think that from the work we've done so far, what we can see is there is obviously no silver bullet to this, because if there was, it would happen by now, and everything would be rosy and fine. What we're finding, and it touches on what Simon said, is that there is a fundamental lack of understanding of what's going on. One thing we picked up, as Simon said in the research, is just the amount of people that answer a question with don't know. And you can see it in some of the more critical elements. It's around about 40% of people, over 40%, don't believe that their behaviours have any impact on water scarcity. And then you can see it on even areas that are pretty high profile.
Did you say 40% there, Martin? Is that right?
Yeah, and it's only 30% that say that they recognise that their activity has an impact on water scarcity. And then if you take issues like CSO, so combined sewage overflows, you can see it's around about 40% of people don't know why it happens. They just assume it's a choice, or it's just a sort of an activity that takes place near them. The idea that it prevents flooding that's completely lost as well. So there is no single way to solve this. But I think what is probably missing is a national industrial strategy story about the role that water plays in society. And Sam and Simon have both talked about how people don't understand what it is until it's potentially gone. That what you can't do is switch the water off and say, right, you like it now, don't you? That's not an option. But what there certainly is missing is that story around the importance of water. And I don't just mean the industry. Our research even shows the value of water is not understood. So by that I mean your point, Mark, a minute ago, that people don't know how much they consume. If you kind of know what your bill is, but you're not quite sure how much you consume, if it's petrol, for example, you know how much it costs per litre because partly you see it every time you fill up your car, but you have a sense of what it might look like. The same question about how much do people consume, the same question of how much does it cost for a pint of water? I don't know. Like, it's a really difficult question for people to answer. So if that value isn't there, you don't really appreciate the commodity that you're buying. And then if you combine that with the with just the general lack of knowledge, you end up with a situation where it's just sort of a problem that's out there. The bit that's missing is the industrial strategy story. If it was in the energy market or if it was in the automotive industry, the story about skills, investment, opportunity, R&D, changing the way the environment works, that Sam's point about reducing, sorry, that there was a third less supply than there was 30 years ago. If it was the energy industry, the story would be that we can generate a third less energy than we had to 30 years ago. That's an incredible story that I think it's such a hard, difficult thing to get across when these issues are emerging. So there's a whole new conversation that needs to start. Plus, I would say also with these myths and misconceptions, we're finding that a lot of this stuff that you read in the press is sticking with people because there isn't really the counter narrative to challenge what's out there. And lastly, what I'd say is around trust is that we've looked into where people get their information from, and interestingly, water companies are more trusted than celebrity activists, for example. It's kind of, so what I'm saying by that is that people understand that this is it's entertainment, it's news, it's interesting, it's something to consume. The exposure where people choose to get their information from, social media is way higher than anything else. At the same time, people don't trust it. So they know it's not reliable information, but they still go there, partly in addiction to social media. So the flip side of that is that the regulator is very well trusted, but nobody goes there for information. So there is a need for a new conversation to shift this around, and that's not going to happen overnight. There's no silver bullets in that, and it's a long road to get there as well.
Can I guess really maybe just to bring it around again, because I think there's no point saying, do we think the public understand the challenges that the water industry has to face over the next years? Because what's patently obvious is they don't understand the situation as it is today. So it's difficult to say, you know, you need to invest in a vast new reservoir when you don't even understand the fact that there's water scarcity issues in wherever you are. But I think, how do we, I mean, Sam, how do you go about talking to people about water when you are, you know, the water utility? In some ways, there's a lack of trust in just general sort of structures and institutions these days. Social media drives some of that stuff anyway. You know, we've you know, every single day you open the papers, there's sort of cynicism, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it, not just in the water sector, right across society. How do we talk to people about water, or maybe how should we talk to people as against how we currently talk to people about water?
Yeah, I think to Martin's point about value, we need to differentiate between the cost of water and the value of water. Fundamentally, you know, your water bill is the cheapest currently of all your utilities. So 1,000 litres of water from Southern Water, you know, pumped clean and fresh to your taps is about £1.20, I think, at the moment for 1,000 litres of water.
That's a lot of Costa coffees, isn't it? For
exactly right. You know, where else can you buy a litre of water for that price other than the supermarket potentially, of course. But then the value of that water, the value to society, the value to wildlife, the value to industry, the embedded water and all the materials that that we produce and the industry and farming, etc. So what it needs is more than social media. It needs a conversation, it needs a dialogue. And that's what I've seen in my time here in the industry and being a journalist for local papers before. I've seen probably to the detriment actually of quality face-to-face conversations, the rise of social media over that time and the pursuit of reach and the assumption that reach means impact, but it doesn't. And so where we see qualitative kind of, I said it right first time, that word, conversations and benefits, had to call it out, is in the face-to-face engagement that we do with consultations. So that's when we are out and about in village halls, in shopping centres, in communities and talking with people. And as you can imagine, I'm fairly evangelistic about the industry, about recycling, if you get me started on that topic as well. And what we see is actually customers kind of sometimes stomping in, with an issue which we can, engage on and tackle that, whether it's a billing issue or a local flooding issue, something like that, or just trust. And over time, having met with somebody face to face, put a face to the big corporate, entity that is Southern Water, actually they leave with a much better understanding, appreciation of what we do, and we've seen that barometer of trust get shifted. I think if you want to win hearts and minds, then a conversation will be a targeted Facebook ad anytime.
And do you find, just to pick on that, do you find that people are starting a conversation from a negative point of view about Southern Water, about water, about whatever, and once you start explaining or talking to them, or whatever, do you find it's a reasonably easy task to turn that around, so that they not so much that they support everything Southern Water do, but they sort of understand the complexity of the issue?
Yeah, I think to go back to an earlier point you made about the industry being in a slump, I'd actually say that we're coming out of the slump, and actually things are starting to improve. We see the credibility start to improve. We see our Clean Rivers and Seas Task Force, for example, doing amazing work to reduce our reliance on combined sewer overflows across our region. We see the Water Resources Programme start to gather pace, and conversations coming with customers about the benefits that will bring, not just for communities but for the environment. The hardest thing, of course, with any conversation that I have is it's the Southern Water lanyard. Of course I would say this is great for reasons. Up Southern Water pays my mortgage. I'm employed by the company. Company spokesman says. And so when we are trying to rebuild trust, which we are doing and succeeding, I might add as well, with our communities, we need to be doing that alongside others. So that's securing that advocacy support from local authorities, from environmental groups, from suppliers, and actually also from community, peers and activists. Because when we see hyper-local issues and the way those are reported, looking in the comment sections of media articles or Facebook posts, and you'll see advocates popping up and actually clarifying, because they've been given the right information and they're using that to kind of go back and really help to back up some of the key kind of, whether it's the facts or another side to that issue. So I think what we're seeing still is the legacy of privatization wasn't ever popular with people, but look at the amount of investment that's happened because of that. But it's the legacy of privatization, and perhaps the way that was handled decades ago is still then tarnishing the industry's reputation currently. And so it's all to play for in terms of rebuilding. But it's going to take a we and us to be able to do that. So that's water companies and all those other partners that I've mentioned already.
And the we, I think we had a chat about this earlier. The we actually isn't just the water industry. It's got to be everybody, doesn't it? It's got to be. Yeah. We can't do it to society. We got to do it with society, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We are at a pivotal moment, in the industry at the moment, when actually our customers and stakeholders' expectations are higher than ever, and that's great. That means our current business plan is pitched for twice the investment as the previous 5-year period, because we're trying to do that much more, because that's what's expected of us. That's a good thing. This is added value for customers, added value for the environment, but we need to capitalize on that, so that we make sure we're helping customers and stakeholders understand why that investment is needed, the benefits of it, the fact that it has to come from bills ultimately. So bills have to rise in order to make those improvements. And we need to help customers care more fundamentally about the environment, so that they're more willing to pay more for these improvements, and crucially trust the water industry to deliver them.
That's something we'll come back to, that trust bit, I think, at the end. But Simon, I think interestingly, in terms of customer engagement, I always like to work from data, and if you look at politics, it's run on polls, isn't it? Now, yeah. I know everyone says the polls are wrong, but actually the polls are usually quite close, actually, to be honest, by the end, as was shown in the recent election. I mean, there is a lot of polling done, but there's not a lot of polling publicized, is there? It's not out there, is there, about. And is that something that we could improve on, or maybe we could do? I mean, you would always advocate for more polling, I'm sure, but in terms of how would we use polling in terms of gathering the data to be able to help Sam and Martin in their things of trying to alter opinion? How do you think we could go about that? Is it more sort of transparency? That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I think transparency is useful. I think there is actually a lot of polling going on. You just don't necessarily see it, and we see it at election time because it has to be published. The news companies run with it. They want to show what's going to happen. It's a big news story of the day. The likes of Southern Water, all the water companies, there's a lot of polling. Ofwat are doing a lot of polling. All various different players are doing it, but they're keeping it very much for themselves, or sharing it kind of out to the public domain. But there is a huge amount we can be doing to understand where the public.
Why are they doing that, Simon? Why is it being kept internally? I mean, I know we're notorious in the sector for making things complicated, but why don't we say here's a poll of customers, and those customers obviously don't know how much water they consume. I mean, why don't we do that? Why could we not drive national conversations through that, particularly off water, particularly people?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why it can't be done, to be honest. I think usually things done by water companies are done for themselves. They've got a purpose, they want to do it to answer a question inside the organisation. It is a little bit different at the Ofwat level. Obviously, Ofwat will publish everything they do, and we do work with them on the CMEX and the DMEX programs, where they actually measure the performance of the water companies from a customer perspective across the industry, and that's published. It's used to manage the kind of the water companies in terms of their performance levels and those kind of things, and that is out there. It's very transparent.
CMEX and DMEX, for instance, if you take CMEX customer and D is developer, I guess. I mean, it may be published, but it's buried in a report. It's not on social media. It's not sort of accessible. And I would, I would guess if you went down the pub and said, right, who's heard the latest Southern Water CMEX score, I would suspect you'd be the boar in the corner on your own quite quickly, I would imagine. So how do we talk about it more? Should we talk about it more?
I think we should. There's people make assumptions that aren't necessarily true. And we've seen that. We've seen it in the water sector. We've seen it in the data that we collected. We've seen it in other sectors that if you don't join the conversation, if you don't tell the public what's happening, they make their own minds up, or they tack off to whatever the latest headline was. And then you get in a really vicious circle. The people hear a headline, that becomes a narrative. They hear that reinforced on social media or somewhere else, and they believe that's what's true. And the more they believe something, the harder it is to move them away from that viewpoint. Because when you do tell them it's not true, they go, nah, you're making that up. You've got the Southern Water lanyard on. You have to say that for the company. This is what I've heard more often. So there is, I think, there's real.
And I guess, Martin, that's where the gap is, where people step in who they have an agenda, but it's usually a single issue agenda. They usually have a following on social media or something like that. And yet they sort of say, right, this is truth. Now, you say they have a low trust in those, but those people definitely are driving the current agenda in the sector. I mean, I'm like, particularly in terms of the privatization, nationalization debate, which I think is right herring myself. But anyway, would more polling, would more sort of information, would more transparency out there help people become, more informed as to where they feel that the water company should be investing?
I think Sam touched on the we point, and I think that's really important, because what Simon's talking about when you challenge something you hear from an authority is that you tend to this is a really obvious point to make. You tend to trust people that you trust, and that might even be people like you or people that you want to hear from. So is that a water company? Potentially it might be an authority, but it's much more likely when you're down the pub, Mark, in the corner talking about CMEX, it's much more likely that somebody who wants to hear the conversation about CMEX is likely to listen to you rather than everybody. So I think it comes down to understanding how an audience consumes information and then making that information available to that audience group in that way, rather than just being on broadcast mode where you just want to say, right, here's our story and hope it lands. And to Sam's point earlier on about the pursuit of reach and assuming that's impact, it's the same thing that on the kind of other side of the coin, if you like, that we can make as well. It's just by putting something out there, assuming that you've said it once, therefore everyone should understand it, because loads of people have, in theory, read it on whatever social channel, or even just an article or two, or whatever it might be. Assuming that's enough is a mistake as well. It's constantly going on, repeatedly thinking about how do you talk to people to actually get through to them. And Sam made the point earlier on that when people interact with their water company, they have a good experience because there's a conversation with somebody, and you tend to walk away thinking, rather than you thinking that was water company X, you think that was Dave or Janet or somebody who was helping you out with that project, and actually you view them as a human, not as an entity. And that in itself is a channel, and that is obviously an asset. We know that works because, to Sam's point again, you have a conversation with somebody, not just in the pursuit of reach. So one of the things that's really important from polling is to understand how people consume their information. What is it that's important to them? What drives them to want to be part of the conversation? And then little by little, you can make incremental gains. What you can't do is just suddenly switch it on with a new conversation tomorrow that everyone's just going to understand. But that fundamental insight as to how people consume information, I think, is key. Otherwise, you're guessing as to whether it's interesting or not, and that's the challenge.
So if we sort of, I think we sort of concluded that, you know, we need to engage in a more data-driven educational way with the public. We need to try to help work with them. So we put a sort of a more sympathetic face against the corporate and all that type of stuff. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's some fundamental questions. You know, is there sewage in our rivers? Yes, there is. The question is why and when, right? Okay. And then I guess the question you must come across, Sam, is water scarcity real? Is this real? I mean, like, I'd love to walk out onto my road after the last weekend and say, you know, we're going to be running out of water soon, because I think people would think there's enough water, you know, it's biblical. So is water scarcity real? Is that, do you get that, or how do you go about explaining that?
Yep, but believe me, folks, water scarcity is real. But the difference, I think, the clarification we need to bring to that message is that we're not talking about there's less water than before. There's not. There's the same amount of water. At some times of the year, there's more. You know, we've just had torrential downpours, the rain being actually a bit too fast and heavy to actually recharge, because it just runs off into watercourses and back out to the sea. You know, there is such a thing as the right type of rain. It's slow, steady drizzle, and that's what we will pray for in the water industry, of course. The difference now is that there's the same amount of water, but we recognise we need to leave more of it for nature, especially during a drought. So in Hampshire, we're talking about protecting iconic and rare chalk streams. Something like 85% of the world's chalk streams are in this country. 85%, and two of the finest examples are in Hampshire, the River Test, the River Itchen. So our Hampshire Water Transfer and Water Recycling Project sets about to make up the bulk of a shortfall that we face currently in Hampshire of 166 million litres of water a day. So that's 166 million litres of water a day that we can't take from a river, we can't take from an aquifer. Following our consultation on a desalination plant in 2021 for Hampshire, we know we can't take from the sea. So the other source of water we're looking at then is water recycling. It's taking that treated wastewater from the local wastewater treatment works. It's been through between 14, 16 hours worth of treatment at that site. It's really clean, and we pump it 5.7 kilometres out to sea. It's bonkers. And on average, every second, that site at Bud's Farm in Havant in Hampshire releases 1,500 litres of water a second out to sea. And there we are, merrily abstracting from chalk streams and aquifers further inland. It doesn't make sense. So tap into that treated wastewater, use advanced treatment techniques as they've used it in the States, Singapore, Australia for more than 40 years to produce purified recycled water, and that can then be used as a source for drinking water supply. So when we talk about water scarcity, it's that there's less available to us rather than less, if that makes sense.
So I think that makes perfect sense. I really don't like when people say we're running out of water. You know, we're not running out of water. Okay, we can't make any, but there's plenty of it here. And I think it's water management is what issue. So I think you
using water wisely. Sorry to cut across you, Mark. The key message that I always use as a wrapper for all of our water resources work, including water efficiency, leakage reduction, etc., is about using water wisely. And we all need to do that. And so that's where us using water wisely, and that includes the treated wastewater from, you know, from the sites that we're going to tap into and produce purified recycled water from. So yeah, it is that holistic approach.
And in terms of, you know, going forward then, Sam, I mean, the public engage quite well in nature-based solutions, right? So I think a lot of people don't really understand what nature-based solutions is, other than it's not concrete and it's not a pump, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an awful lot of talk around the industry about putting back in nature-based solutions, using nature-based solutions. Where's Southern Water in this sort of conversation?
doing huge amounts of work. So I'd encourage folk to have a look at our Clean Rivers and Seas task force, putting in swales and planters that take rainfall, so that's managing that water and using it wisely, as we've said. Slows down the flow of water going into the combined sewer system, so reduces the reliance and impact from the combined sewer overflows. Nature-based solutions on the drinking water side of the business, not so prevalent, because for the very reason that we're protecting the environment by leaving more water there. This, on the water resources side, it's about technology, frankly, picking up the slack where the environment has previously.
Yeah, I mean, I should always point out, when we talk about these things, about the performance of the water industry, an absolutely enormous success story is drinking water in this country. It's probably the best drinking water in the world. You go to any tap in this country and drink it safely, and you won't get sick. Which always astonishes me, the amount of people who buy water bottles. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. In terms of nature-based solutions, Martin, do you find, or have you found, or maybe Simon could jump in this one, that people understand that in terms of working with nature? They like that idea, or do they simply think that's a cheaper way of doing it, so I won't have to pay as much? Maybe Martin, you could pick it up.
Yeah, sure. Just terminology for a start. Nature-based solution, we've already lost people at that point, because it's what's he talking about essentially. It's a difficult. It kind of, if you think about it, it kind of does what it says in the tin, but actually it's quite a difficult thing to understand. And I think with the public at large, given that given we talked about what level of understanding there kind of already isn't, the idea of getting into that kind of conversation is difficult. What there is, we did look at people's understanding of the environment and how they feel about the importance. And clearly, when you ask people, should we reduce abstraction essentially, or should we do something better for the environment? You kind of, it's only, I think we found 8% disagree with that idea. So it's a really obvious thing to want to do. You then obviously, if you're developing something, you've got to put it somewhere. And we looked into them. How do people feel about new infrastructure, be it nature-based or be it concrete? How do people feel about that being near them? And interestingly, you often find this in most cases of infrastructure. There is an appetite for people to see new infrastructure built. And interestingly, through water, there is a big majority, I'll get you a number in a second, it's in the 60s, they accept the idea that they personally will experience disruption if there is investment in infrastructure. What you find is that the people that are opposed to investment in these kind of things, much smaller in numbers, but way more motivated and organised in terms of getting their story across. So you end up with quite a skewed story when you read it, which is usually motivated campaign group versus water companies, a simplistic narrative. And actually most people are just participants in this, and not participants, they're in the audience, sorry, and they get the popcorn out and watch what's good entertainment of somebody getting their placards out and somebody else giving a corporate statement to say that, we're sorry, it's really important. I think so that conversation needs to be intercepted more, where we're getting much more, again, back to Sam's we point, there are more voices in explaining this kind of investment. I think the challenge, if nature-based isn't explained properly, is that you can create an assumption that it's a choice, that I'd rather have nature-based than concrete, thanks very much, because it sounds nice, and you talked about trees and a nice pond somewhere, that sounds lovely. If it's not explained properly, it will just get lost in terms of what's going on, and then you end up with they could have chosen nature-based, but they didn't. They chose this instead, and until you get understanding levels high enough, you can't really have that conversation, because you're asking people to join the book at chapter 7, and you've been through chapter 1 to 6 on your own, and expect them to understand what's going on, and it's impossible for them to follow the narrative.
And I guess, Simon, the more technical the questions, the engagement in the polls is, the more don't knows you get, I guess, isn't it? Would that be correct? Would that be?
Yeah, absolutely true. People don't understand technical. We're not that many people are engineers, not that many are technical, not that many want to go beyond the kind of first few keywords. before they kind of switch off and go back to default. This is the generic thing, I think. You know, and we've seen it across multiple sectors. You see people just don't engage with the concept if they have to think about it. What do I need to think? What do I need to know? What's the headline? Bang, that's where I will go. And you know, you talked about, do we talk about money versus kind of nature-based things? Almost if you're starting at the money point, you're in trouble already, because people are going to get hooked upon the bill. They're going to get hooked upon, well, it's £1.50 too much. I've heard my bill's high. Yes, it is. Even if they're paying £4 for a coffee in some shop somewhere. If you can start with that bigger idea, this is where we're going, this is what we're trying to do, and a consistent message is far easier to get them on board. And then those that want the detail, they can have the detail. Majority of them don't want it. They want to know something good, something they can hang on to, and then they'll go with that.
So Sam, do we need, I'm going to get a hard question. Do we need a drought? Do we need an inflection point? You know, do we need a point where people saying, oh my God, this is actually really serious now? You know, do we need the standpipes in the street to actually get people to sit up and listen to us? And I know as a Southern Water spokesman, you're probably not going to say yes to that, but I'm just wondering, do we need that crisis?
Well, hopefully not. But it would be probably the easiest route to getting people's attention and raising the profile of this issue, I think. I think we can do more, and we are rapidly doing so to target customers of the future as well, bill payers of the future, because you know we are in multi-AMP phases of work here on the Strategic Water Resources Programme, and bill payers, you know, in 10, 15 years' time, we're engaging with them now with lesson plans and assemblies and other education materials, not just on the environmental benefits, but on, you know, STEM subjects, etc. as well. So that kind of education package is really important, as well as school talks and tours and you know, community group talks and things like that. And it goes back to conversations, I think. It's probably my journalist kind of training and mindset still kind of being a golden thread in my kind of career and approach to life, is that, you know, you get a much better quality of engagement through a conversation than you do with anything broadcast. And, you know, when I talk about the reliance on social media for reach, it's important, you know, but it's important to then signpost where people can find those, you know, better quality conversations.
Yeah, because I think ultimately we do need to do all the solutions. You know, I think Martin said there's no silver bullet here. You know, we need different water resources. We need new water resources. We need to save water. We need to look after the water. We need to do water recycling. So while it's not a case of simplifying something, because it's going to get more complex. So it's almost like having to reach out and say, walk this path with us, you know, because we are part of the community. And I guess a legitimate criticism could be, and this may well have been a privatization, you know, sort of approach through the 90s, was essentially we're privatized and therefore the government have almost outsourced the water supply for the country. So leave us alone and we'll do it. What you're saying now, Sam, of course, is, you know, within that privatized structure, you still need you need a community to come with you, to work with you. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's everyone's water. You know, we're just the company that processes it, you know, for clean water and wastewater services, and everyone ultimately needs to take a bit of ownership of water and water issues. But everyone's busy. You know, we are clamoring. We're one of a number of industries, and you know, we're up against you know, big marketing communications companies for, you know, for products and brands to get airtime, to get headspace, to get bandwidth with customers, and you know, that's challenging, and that's where it comes down to the various touch points through community groups, through peers, you know, through other partners and advocates is key.
So I mean, Martin, really, the real ultimate question here is, you know, with the acceptance that we perhaps haven't been completely on our communication games to date, you know, what can we do? And when I say we as a sector, what can we do? And how do we do that to make it happen? How do we start making those steps? I mean, obviously there's the stuff Sam just talked about, but I think centrally there's probably what I call sort of perhaps the need for a national honest conversation. You mentioned the lack of an infrastructure strategy.
Mhm.
I think it's because most people think water exists just like oxygen exists, right? And
That's right.
but we're not running out of oxygen. We don't have any problem to access to oxygen, well, yet anyway. But there's no doubt that I think water has fallen by the wayside on the basis that it is ubiquitous and everybody assumes it's going to be there. Yes, there'll be times of plenty and times of stress, but actually it's always going to be there. Do you think really at this stage we need a sort of national water strategy that's almost like ministerial responsibility is driven through, and then companies like Sam's company actually are custodians of the management of that water for the community?
Yeah, well, I think that there's three things I really want to say on that. One is, again, back to Sam's we point, that there's a role for water companies, government, regulator, trade bodies. Everybody has a job to do in telling this story, and it's easy, isn't it, to kind of say, right, Sam and his colleagues should just solve this one because that's where the headlines are. So fix it, and it'll be all right. And I'll stay quiet until basically Sam does fix it, and then I'm going to say, didn't we do well? And I think that's just not really fair. There is a job for everybody to do in that. So that requires a strategy, and it requires everyone to buy into that. And there is certainly a job. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what government's industrial strategy comes up with. You've probably seen at the conference that various ministers have talked about this over the next couple of months. So they've talked about how they want it to be in high value sectors, and they've talked about gigafactories, wind, and data centers. But there isn't a reason why water shouldn't be part of that conversation, given the expertise that does exist in the UK and can easily be part of an international story. So I would say yes, there certainly is. Secondly, the point to do with it not being a silver bullet, we're working with Future Water Association, and we've created a reputation steering group, and that is, and the report we're about to publish in the next few days provides some of the basis of some of the areas we are going to focus on. So we're going to look at myths and misconceptions and delve into that a bit more. Also preparing the public for AMP8, and back to the kind of book analogy earlier on, so the public isn't landing at chapter 8 of AMP8, we're actually starting at the beginning. People can kind of see that this is part of a plan, part of a strategy, and there is an end goal in point. And then a few other themes as well, particularly consenting, construction, all those kind of issues that are challenging beyond just supplying water. And as a group, we're going to look at those and come up with recommendations for each of those things, so we can try and provide some insight with Future Water. If anyone's interested in hearing more about that as well, just do drop me a email about that as well. And then lastly, linked to this as well, I think there's a really useful book to read as well, which is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and it gives you an idea of how the public is consuming information. So on the kind of slow side, it's perfect. Well, so on the far side, actually, I'll start with, it's human nature just to kind of look at things from like, what's the common narrative, what's easy, what doesn't require difficult thinking. It's perfectly normal to do that. And the slow thinking is about what's deliberate thinking, what's much more uncommon. That's a much harder human trait, and you can't expect the public to do that. So the more we can shift water into the fast thinking conversation, where we're in control of that, that's going to help us. So Fergal Sharkey sits in the fast thinking. There is, and it's most campaigners do because it works. There is a sewage issue. Who should we blame? Water company aren't looking at it. It's really simple. The hard thinking is, why is this actually happening? What's going on? That requires a choice to think, and that is like, I'm not saying people are clever, right? But it's a natural instinct not to do that. So the more we can make our industry sit in the right camp within that, so we're not talking to ourselves, the better, I'd say.
And I think actually to sort of just build on that, some of the schemes that will be necessary, Sam, will actually be transferring water across from different places. It'll be new reservoirs, it'll be water recycling. Yeah. I always say to people, the difference between water and electricity is water is heavy. So a cubic meter of water weighs a ton, right? So every time you pump it, that's a lot of energy. You can make an electron up in Dounreay and you can consume it down in southern water, and it's there's no weight in that. I think so. So water recycling is important, but equally these large infrastructure schemes are very important as well. And I guess the challenge for you and your colleagues is to actually sell those two extreme schemes. And I guess maybe what would be interesting is what response do you initially get, and then how do you change that response around to supporting, especially if nobody has actually suffered from a lack of water in the last 50 years? How do you go about that? What is your strategy for that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there's the kind of fundamental construction and operational impacts of a project. So we'll engage and consult in those areas where people could be affected by what I call dugga work. But actually, it's the wider communities that will be receiving the new water or benefiting from the resilience to their rivers and nature that need to be engaged as well. But we're talking about projects that take multi-amps to deliver. So the Hampshire Water Transfer Water Recycling Project, we're 10 years away from switch on of that project. So, it's quite challenging then to be engaging and consulting now on something you're not going to switch on for 10 years. And I get that from people. I have little old ladies and gents in the drop-in session saying, well, we won't be alive then, and I think, well, hopefully, and they say, but it's the right thing to do for our kids. And so they see that benefit, and it's about selling and helping people understand the long-term benefits and that resilient water future, as we would call it, for the whole of our region and indeed the whole of the country. Because when you mention, Mark, quite rightly, the big intercompany transfers, all water companies share water across their networks with neighbouring companies, but we don't ship it across multiple companies currently, but we will be. We are rapidly moving towards the national water grid that's been talked about for some time, with big central resources, new reservoirs like Thames Water's Abingdon Reservoir up in Oxfordshire, for example, with a big bulk supply coming down to Southern Water's patch. These big central resources are absolutely key to create what are drought-proof sources of water. That's the key thing. So when you're using water recycling, it's an always-on source of water. So we're talking about being able to produce water during a drought that's not from the environment, and that's not a position that we've been in previously.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, actually. And I guess really just coming to the end now with Simon, I think the polling side of things, I'm guessing the real negatives are the ones that everyone thinks about, is CSO discharges, leaks, all that type of stuff. And I guess to turn them around, I think we need to start selling good stories, or telling people, asking people, so that they actually understand what Sam and his colleagues are doing is actually for the long term. It's not something that'll be solved next week or next month.
No, it won't be solved next week. You're right. It's a long-term sell, but also it's about having positive stories out there. I looked at some data just a second ago. If you think back to 2008, when the banks basically broke the world, and we all thought we were going to be able to eat, work, or anything for a while, actually they've come out as the most trusted organisations that we looked at. Everyone's kind of forgotten about it. It works again now. Reputations can be restored, and you can build them, but it's about having that positive balance, positive stories coming out there, and making sure they're the right kind of stories, and that you're talking in a way people can understand and can buy into it. And they get the bigger picture, they get the concept, they get where you're going, and they get the facts to follow that up. And if you don't have those bigger stories, it won't wash through.
Well, I think, to be honest, let's finish it on a positive note. If the banks can recover their reputation, then I think there's hope for us all. It's been fascinating, guys. Really interesting. I think starting really from the 4%, thinking water scarcity is a problem. We've meandered our way down, and we sort of ended up with sort of engaging. How do we engage with people about large schemes that they probably can't even envisage? I do agree with the need for a national water strategy. If I use those terms, Martin, I know you didn't, but I think a national water strategy. I'd love to see more polling, less kept private, more transparency. And I know that the water companies are working very hard to engage at multiple levels, multi-agency games. So I think at times we can be very critical. I don't think there's anybody more self-critical than the water sector, but there's also there's lots of good news stories as well. So I just want to thank you, the three of you, because I think it's been, we could have gone on for a lot longer. And but it's been really, really interesting, and I'll bring it to a halt. But just one last thing from me: please fill out the survey that you will get into your inbox in an hour. And the next blue thread is October the 22nd, and it will actually be about something that we probably will pick up some of these themes, because we're going to talk about radical change in the sector, which I think is probably something that we could all agree is needed. So thanks very much, Sam, Martin, and Simon, for your time. I very much appreciate it and your thoughts. And we'll see you all again soon. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great.
Pleasure. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.